The ship was silent except for the hum of its engines and the occasional hiss of air cycling through vents, the kind of quiet that made Elias's thoughts louder than he liked. He had been walking the dimly lit corridor for 10 minutes before he finally stopped outside the containment room. His crew had patched the alien girl's wounds, secured her behind a barrier, and then promptly handed him the responsibility of figuring it out. Because apparently that was what commanders were for, cleaning up situations nobody else wanted to touch. Through the transparent wall, he could see her curled into herself on the narrow bed, a blanket pulled around her shoulders. She didn't look like any of the nightmare creatures the Academy's xenobiology instructors had once terrified him with. She looked human enough, too human, if he was being honest, but the differences were obvious if you knew where to look. Her ears, long and elegant, tilted slightly back like they were listening to something he couldn't hear. Her eyes glowed faintly, not in an intimidating way, but in a way that made him think of stars through fog. She was shivering. He keyed the panel and stepped inside. The lights brightened at his presence, and she flinched, shrinking back as though even photons were suspicious when carried in on human boots. "I come in peace," he said, raising his hands in what he hoped was the universal gesture for "don't stab me. I'm friendly." She stared at him blankly, then shifted the blanket higher, as though ready to use it as a shield. Great, he thought. First contact, and I'm about to lose a standoff against a blanket. He moved closer, careful not to spook her. "Listen, you're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. You just look cold." He gestured vaguely, realizing how idiotic he sounded. What was he supposed to do? Lecture her on thermoregulation? She tilted her head. The ears twitched once, twice, then she muttered something in that liquid, unfamiliar language. He caught none of it. "I don't speak whatever that was," he admitted. "But if it was an insult, I'm choosing to take it as a compliment." That earned him no reaction, but at least she didn't look like she was about to leap across the room and claw his eyes out. After a long pause, Elias sighed and rubbed his face. "Okay, here's the thing. The ship's heating system is crap. Been crap since the last refit. My quarters have an extra blanket and actual climate control that doesn't feel like living in a meat freezer. You're welcome to use it. No strings attached. Unless you're allergic to polyester, in which case, I'm afraid interstellar diplomacy ends right here." Her eyes followed his hand as he gestured toward the door. For a second, he thought she understood. Then she blinked slowly, muttered something that might have been a curse, and pulled the blanket tighter. "Fine," Elias muttered. "Stay here. Freeze. Enjoy the ambience. I'll just be in my quarters, living in decadent warmth, laughing maniacally." He turned to leave, but then he heard the sound of bare feet padding softly behind him. He glanced over his shoulder. She was following, blanket draped around her like some awkward ceremonial robe, expression guarded but curious. By the time they reached his quarters, Elias was acutely aware of how this looked. "Commander brings alien survivor to private cabin. Perfect headline material. The crew would have a field day." He waved her inside. "Welcome to Casa, Elias. It's not much, but comes with mood lighting and a stunning view of the void. Don't touch that panel. Last time I did, the shower sprayed cold water for 3 days straight." She stepped inside carefully, her ears brushing the low ceiling, and looked around like she'd just walked into the inner sanctum of a bizarre new culture, which, he supposed, she had. He tossed her the spare blanket, which she caught clumsily, glaring at him like he'd thrown a weapon. "It's a blanket," he reassured her. "Soft, warm, not poisonous, unless you count the laundry detergent." She wrapped herself in it without hesitation, then hesitated, as if reconsidering whether accepting human comfort was a betrayal of some sacred code. Elias sank onto the edge of the bed, stretching his legs with a groan. "Go ahead, take the bed. I'll use the chair. It reclines, kind of. Well, if you count snapping forward unexpectedly as reclining." To his surprise, she shook her head. She padded across the room and sat gingerly on the other side of the bed, clearly choosing proximity over solitude. Elias stiffened, then forced himself to relax. Maybe she just wanted the warmth. Maybe she didn't care about human customs, about privacy, about the rules that had kept him alive for decades. He lay back carefully, keeping to his side, hands folded behind his head. She curled up near him, her back brushing his arm, her breathing quick and uneven. Then she whispered something soft in her own language, the syllables slipping through the air like threads of music. "I don't understand you," he said quietly, "but I hope you're not calling me a space cockroach." Her only reply was a sound he almost mistook for laughter, a tiny huff through her nose. Then, after a pause, her heartbeat began to slow, settling into a rhythm. Oddly enough, it matched his own. Elias stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was how galactic wars started. Two people, two species, lying awkwardly in the dark, waiting for sleep and trying very hard not to notice how strange it all felt. If anyone asked, he'd say he was just being humane, offering shelter, that was all. Nothing more. But as her breathing steadied beside him, he knew he was already lying. Elias woke to the unmistakable sound of something being stolen off his plate. It took him a moment to register that he wasn't in the mess hall, that he was in his quarters, and that the thief was sitting cross-legged on his bed with both blankets wrapped around her like some triumphant conqueror. Lyrana, he'd learned her name the night before when she muttered it half asleep, was holding his breakfast ration square between her fingers. She bit into it with the solemnity of a priestess performing a ritual. "That," Elias said, rubbing his face, "was mine. Hard-earned. The computer makes me type in a code and everything." She ignored him, chewing slowly, ears twitching with each bite. When he tried to reclaim it, she hissed something in her language that definitely sounded like a threat. He threw up his hands. "Fine. Take it. Clearly you've mastered the ancient human art of theft." The door chimed. Before Elias could react, Lieutenant Marin stepped inside without waiting for permission. His second-in-command froze, blinking at the sight of the alien girl perched on his bed, blanket cocooned, chewing his breakfast. Then, with all the subtlety of a meteor strike, Marin grinned. "Commander," Marin said, "should I tell the crew the rumors are true, or do you want to give the official announcement yourself?" Elias groaned. "There are no rumors, and there is no announcement. She's cold. She needed somewhere to sleep. End of story." Marin folded his arms. "End of story? The alien dignitary is snuggled up in your quarters eating your food, and you think people are going to stop talking?" Lyrana tilted her head at Marin, then stuffed the remainder of the ration square into her mouth defiantly. She chewed while making direct eye contact with Elias, as if to underline her victory. "Fantastic," Elias muttered. "First contact, and I've somehow been adopted as a personal food dispenser." Marin leaned close, lowering his voice. "Sir, with all due respect, Command's going to want an update. They'll want to know how you're managing her." Elias waved him off. "I'll write a report. It'll be thrilling. Alien ate breakfast. Commander's still hungry. Galactic relations at all-time high." When Marin finally left, chuckling under his breath, Elias turned back to Lyrana. She was fiddling with his datapad, the one he'd left on the desk. The device sprang to life under her touch, scrolling through menus like she'd been born using it. He crossed the room quickly and snatched it from her hands. "Oh no, absolutely not. That's classified. You don't get to read my emails." She blinked at him, unbothered, then jabbed a finger at the screen, mimicking the motion he'd used. Her eyes shone faintly, and the device flickered as though confused by her presence. Elias frowned. "Wait, did you just hack my datapad with your finger?" She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, sharp and mischievous. His stomach dropped. "Great. I've brought a telepathic hacker aboard. Fleet Command is going to love this." The next few days were chaos. Lyrana wandered the ship as if she'd been serving aboard it for years, baffling the crew by appearing in engineering to poke curiously at the plasma coils or standing silently on the bridge, watching the stars. She barely spoke, but she didn't need to. Every gesture, every tilted ear, every unimpressed glance seemed to communicate volumes. The crew grew fond of her in spite of themselves. Elias, on the other hand, became the butt of endless jokes. Walking into the mess hall was a nightmare. Someone always coughed Commander's girlfriend into their drink, and someone else always asked if interspecies dating was covered in the regulations manual. He responded with glares and muttered promises of extended shifts. Lyrana seemed entirely oblivious, happily stealing food from his tray each time they sat down. He tried teaching her a few words of standard. "This is water," he said, holding up a glass. "Water," she repeated, ears twitching. "Good. And this is, hey, don't pour it on the console." She shrugged as though testing the effect of water on sensitive electronics was a normal cultural activity. Despite the headaches, Elias couldn't ignore the way she lingered close to him, the way her laughter, small, quick bursts, seemed to appear whenever he muttered something sarcastic under his breath. She was learning, faster than he wanted to admit. One night, as they sat in his quarters, she pointed at herself and said haltingly, "Lyrana." He smiled despite himself. "Yeah, Lyrana." Then she tapped his chest. "Elias." The sound of his name in her voice startled him. Softer, less clipped, as though it belonged to something older than his own tongue. He swallowed hard. "That's me. Commander Elias, bringer of food, guardian of blankets, reluctant babysitter of starlit hackers." She tilted her head, confused by the string of words, then laughed. Not a huff, not a breath, but an actual laugh. The sound filled the small cabin, brighter than the humming walls, and Elias knew then that the line between duty and something dangerously personal was already beginning to blur. That night, when the lights dimmed and she curled beside him again, whispering words he didn't understand, he told himself, for the 100th time, that this was temporary. A situation to be managed. A diplomatic duty. Nothing more. But as her hand brushed against his in the dark, steady and unafraid, Elias realized he was lying to himself again. And worse, he wasn't even trying very hard. The message arrived as a piercing chime that rattled the bridge consoles, followed by a voice so sharp it felt like it had been sharpened on broken glass. The translation matrix sputtered to keep up, producing the kind of stuttering tone that made Elias wish he could pretend the signal was just static interference. "This is the Council of Vale. You are harboring one of our own. Return her immediately or face consequences." The bridge fell silent. Every officer glanced sideways at Elias, who leaned back in the command chair and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Consequences," he muttered. "They never say what kind. Could be a sternly worded letter. Could be vaporizing the ship. Love the mystery." Lyrana, standing near the navigation console with her arms folded, looked unimpressed. She spoke in her language, quick and clipped. The translator stuttered, then announced, "Do not believe them. They exaggerate. Always exaggerating." Elias raised a brow. "That's reassuring, I think." He turned to his communications officer. "Send back. Thanks for the friendly warning, but the girl's busy stealing my breakfast. Call again later." "Sir," Marin warned. "Maybe not that exact wording." The alien signal continued, demanding her return, threatening consequences again, then repeating the entire message as if the council thought humans were particularly slow learners. Elias sighed. "Yeah, they're serious. All right, mute them before they start a third rerun." Later, in the ready room, Elias found himself pacing while Lyrana sat on the edge of the table, swinging her legs, looking completely unconcerned about the fact that her people were apparently ready to start a war over her. "So," Elias said, "want to tell me why a supposedly random survivor has an entire council screaming at me?" She tapped her long fingers against the table, then spoke carefully, slow enough that the translator didn't stutter. "I am not random. My father is counselor of the 5th seat." Elias stopped pacing. "Counselor, as in big, important, alien politician counselor?" She nodded once. He rubbed his face. Of course the one alien I bring on board is space royalty. Couldn't have been a tourist or a scientist, no. I had to pick up a runaway princess." Her ears twitched at the word. "Not princess. Exile. Exile." He frowned. "Why?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I ask questions. They dislike questions." Elias sank into the chair opposite her. "Well, that makes 2 of us. Command's going to lose their minds when they find out I'm housing the interstellar equivalent of a political scandal." Her eyes glowed faintly as she leaned closer. Do not send me back. If I return, they will silence me. Permanently. The weight of her words settled over the room. Elias stared at her for a long moment, then groaned. Fantastic. Not only am I babysitting royalty, now I'm committing interstellar treason. Just when I thought my week couldn't get worse. The alarm klaxon chose that exact moment to blare. On the bridge, the main display lit up with crimson warnings. 3 Veil warships had just slipped out of warp, looming in perfect triangular formation. Well, Elias muttered, that answers the what kind of consequences question. The crew scrambled to stations. Marin called out shield percentages. Weapons officers powered up defense systems. The alien ships sent another transmission, return Lyrana, or prepare for annihilation. Elias sat in his chair, rubbing his temples. You know, this would all be a lot easier if you were actually a toaster. No one threatens galactic war over a toaster. Lyrana smirked, a flash of amusement breaking through the tension. I do not burn bread. Good, Elias said, because right now, that's the least of our problems. The alien fleet locked weapons. The Orpheus vibrated as their targeting systems painted the hull. Elias made a snap decision. Open a channel. Visual. The council envoy appeared on the screen, draped in flowing metallic robes, eyes cold as vacuum. Elias plastered on his best diplomatic smile, the one that usually convinced inspectors to ignore minor violations like illegal coffee machines. Good evening, Elias said. Commander Elias of the Orpheus. First, thank you for visiting. Love what you've done with the warships. Very intimidating. Now, I'd like to propose a non-explosive solution. The envoy glared. Return the exile. Elias shook his head. See, here's the thing. I've grown attached. She eats my food, breaks my datapads, makes fun of my hair. If I hand her back, who's going to keep me humble? Behind him, Marin muttered. Sir, maybe less humor. Humor is my only defense. Elias hissed back. The envoy's glare deepened. This is no joke. You are risking war. Elias leaned forward. And you're risking missing out on an opportunity. She came to us. She asked questions. She stayed. That tells me something your council doesn't want to admit. Maybe humans aren't the monsters you've painted us as. Maybe fear works both ways. The envoy hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to humans, pushing back with words instead of plasma fire. The silence stretched. Finally, the screen went dark. The Veil ships held their position, but did not fire. Elias exhaled, sinking into his chair. All right, that bought us maybe an hour before they decide to stop listening. Lyrana touched his arm lightly, her voice soft. You risk much. He gave her a tired smile. Yeah, well, what's a little interstellar war between friends? Her laughter, small but genuine, rippled through the tense air. For the first time since the fleet appeared, the bridge crew smiled. And for Elias, sitting in the captain's chair with doom hovering outside the hull, the sound was enough to remind him why he hadn't handed her over already. The Veil ships shadowed the Orpheus for 3 days, never firing, never leaving, just hanging there like hungry sharks waiting for the first drop of blood. Every time Elias sat in the command chair, he could feel their eyes on him, or whatever alien equivalent of eyes they used. He started keeping a mug of coffee in his hand, partly to look casual, partly because if this was the end of humanity, he wanted to go out caffeinated. The crew grew restless. Whispers carried through the corridors, all circling the same question, when would the Veil strike? Elias kept pretending to be unbothered, even cracking jokes when the tension got too thick. Relax, he told the crew. If they wanted to kill us, they'd have done it already. Clearly, they're just waiting for us to bake them cookies. Lyrana spent the days hovering near him, quiet, ears twitching whenever a new message from the fleet arrived. She practiced standard and stolen moments, repeating words under her breath. Sometimes she slipped up in ways that made the crew laugh, like when she pointed at a plasma torch and confidently declared, "Fork." Elias teased her gently, and every time she responded with that tiny smirk that made him forget there were warships outside aiming cannons at his hull. Then came the ultimatum. A transmission buzzed through the bridge, crisp and merciless. Deliver Lyrana to the Veil flagship, or the Orpheus would be destroyed. No riddles, no theatrics this time, just a clear deadline. 24 hours. Elias leaned back in his chair. Well, that's considerate. At least they gave us time to pack our bags. Marin gave him a look. Sir, this isn't the time. It's always the time for sarcasm, Elias muttered, though the weight in his chest made it harder to deliver. Later, in his quarters, Lyrana confronted him. You cannot surrender me. If I return, they will erase me. You know this. I know, Elias admitted. He paced, running a hand through his hair. But if I don't, they'll erase all of us. That's the problem. You're not just my responsibility anymore. You're the reason we've got 3 warships breathing down our necks. She stepped closer, eyes sharp, ears angled forward. Then we show them they are wrong. Show them humans are not monsters. Show them us. Elias blinked. Us? You want me to just invite them over for tea? Maybe a game of cards? Her expression didn't change. Yes. He laughed, short and incredulous. That was a joke. I do not joke, she said. That was how Elias found himself explaining to the senior staff that their brilliant plan for survival was to host a dinner party. The looks he received ranged from horror to outright disbelief. You want to invite the Veil Commander aboard? Marin asked, rubbing his temples. Not want, Elias corrected. Have to. We're not going to win this with firepower, and if we hand her over, we lose something bigger than this ship. So dinner. It's diplomacy. With appetizers. The logistics were a nightmare. The galley crew scrambled to prepare food that wasn't entirely beige. The engineers worked overtime to make the lighting less funereal, and someone even rigged up a centerpiece using spare wiring and glowing crystals from the engine room. Elias walked through the preparations, muttering, Perfect. Nothing says peace like flowers made of radioactive quartz. When the Veil delegation arrived, escorted under heavy guard, the entire crew stood stiff and silent. Elias put on his best welcoming grin. Welcome to the Orpheus. We hope you enjoy tonight's feature presentation, not killing us. The Veil commander swept in, robes gleaming, eyes narrowed. Behind him trailed 2 aides, who looked at every human chair as though calculating whether it was a trap. Elias guided them to the dining area, where the crew had somehow transformed the mess hall into something almost respectable. Dinner was chaos. The translation matrix kept mangling phrases, turning polite greetings into bizarre threats. One moment the Veil commander said, It is an honor, and the machine blared, I claim your lungs. Elias nearly spat out his drink. The food didn't help. Lyrana gamely demonstrated how to eat a ration loaf, biting into it like it was a delicacy, while the Veil aides poked suspiciously at their plates. One attempted to drink soup by pouring it directly onto the table, which at least broke the tension with laughter from the crew. Throughout it all, Elias kept talking. He told stories about the Orpheus, about missions gone wrong in ridiculous ways, about crew members who had survived by sheer luck and stubbornness. He leaned into humor, letting it soften the edges of the fear hanging over the room. Slowly, unbelievably, the Veil began to listen. Then came the turning point. Lyrana stood, ears tilted high, and spoke in her own language, voice ringing with clarity. She told them she had been taught to fear humans, that they were dangerous and cruel. She admitted she had believed it, until she lived among them, until she had eaten their food, laughed at their strange words, and found herself feeling safe beside one of them. She confessed that her fear had turned into something else, something even more terrifying, trust. The room went quiet. The translator delivered her words without stutter, as though even the machine understood their weight. The Veil commander studied her, then looked at Elias, who raised his glass. To not killing us, Elias said. It was absurd. It was reckless. But when the Veil commander finally allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch upward, Elias knew the absurdity had worked. For the first time, war no longer seemed inevitable, and all it had taken was a dinner party, and soup on the table. The agreement was not signed with pomp or ceremony, but with the sound of awkward coughing and the clatter of cutlery. The Veil commander, after a long silence, had placed his hand flat on the table. Elias mirrored the gesture, their palms not quite touching, but close enough that everyone understood. The aide muttered something about historical recklessness, but no one moved to stop it. That was the moment the war dissolved, not with fire, but with fingers an inch apart over a table sticky with spilled soup. After the delegation departed, the Orpheus erupted into exhausted laughter. Crew members clapped Elias on the shoulder, some congratulating him, others muttering that he'd either saved them all or doomed them spectacularly. He accepted both opinions, with the same weary grin. Lyrana walked beside him, shoulders squared, ears angled forward as though bracing for the storm still to come. Reports flooded in. Fleet Command wanted explanations, detailed logs, and preferably guarantees that Elias hadn't broken interstellar law 6 different ways. He submitted his report with blunt honesty, negotiated peace through hospitality, recommend more dinner parties in future strategic planning. Marin nearly tore his hair out when he read it. They're going to court-martial you. Elias shrugged. Maybe. But they're not going to court-martial me dead, so I call it progress. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The Veil ships did not vanish back into hostile territory. They lingered. Communications opened. Messages were exchanged. Tentative talks began, thin as spider silk but strong enough to hold. The crew of the Orpheus found themselves not only alive, but at the center of a fragile bridge between two species. Through it all, Lyrana remained at Elias's side. She no longer hovered on the edge of things. She spoke openly, even stumbling through standard with increasing confidence. When she called the plasma conduits fire noodles, the engineers adopted the term without hesitation. When she corrected the navigation officer's math mid-course, the bridge applauded. She had become part of them, not an alien guest, but one of the crew. One evening, when the ship drifted in calm orbit around a neutral station, Elias sat in his quarters drafting yet another report. Lyrana slipped inside quietly, then dropped onto his bed with the same ease she had the first night. "You are different," she said suddenly. He looked up. "Different from what?" "From the commander who found me." She tilted her head, ears catching the light. "Then, you carried duty like armor. Now you carry people." Elias blinked, caught off guard. "That's poetic. And terrifyingly accurate. You've been spending too much time with my crew." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything that had happened. The threats, the laughter, the strange closeness neither of them had expected. Elias leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know," he said, "when I offered you my bed that first night, I thought I was just being decent, helping someone who was cold. I didn't realize I was signing up for galactic diplomacy, political scandal, and you eating 90% of my rations." Her laughter was soft but real. "You regret?" He shook his head. "Not for a second." The weeks turned into months. Negotiations blossomed into treaties. The Veil and humanity discovered they could argue endlessly without firing weapons, which Elias considered a monumental victory. The Orpheus remained at the center of it all, its reputation forever tied to the night soup had spilled and war had stopped. Fleet Command, predictably, did not court-martial Elias. Instead, they promoted him, partly out of gratitude and partly because no one else seemed reckless enough to sit across from alien warlords armed only with sarcasm. On the day the first formal treaty was signed, Elias stood at Lyrana's side as representatives of both species clasped hands before the galaxy's watching eyes. When it was over, when the crowd dispersed and the cameras powered down, she turned to him. "You changed me," she said simply. He smiled, tired and proud all at once. "You changed me too." They stood together at the viewport, watching the stars shift. For the first time, Elias felt the hum of the ship, not as a cage of duty, but as the heartbeat of something larger, connection, trust, the fragile miracle of peace. And when Lyrana leaned lightly against him, whispering a word in her language he still couldn't translate, Elias realized he didn't need the translation. Some things, he had learned, were universal. The galaxy had not ended in fire. It had begun again in laughter and trust, in the quiet closeness of two unlikely allies who had dared, against all odds, to share a bed and find something unexpected waiting there. The end.